A legend may be called by many names, and the legend that we're talking about in this video has been called the exemplar Imagineer, the indelible man, the whimsical Imagineer, a rebel, one of the greats, a god. He's even called himself the weirdest one of all, and I call him an inspiration. In this episode of Disney Legends, we're talking about Rolly Crump. Rolly grew up with a great imagination, drawing since the age of 2, and he was raised by his single mother who always supported his art and his dreams, which were formed by his love of magic, radio, and drawing. Rolly wanted to work for Disney ever since he was blown away in 1933 when he saw The Three Little Pigs in theaters when he was only about 3 or 4 years old. Knowing that his passion was art and that he loved Disney so much, his mom actually wrote a letter to Disney when he was only 16 trying to get him a job. He wasn't hired then, that comes much later. Unlike other artists that we've covered in the series, Rolly didn't have any formal art training, except for when he was 16, he attended Chouinard Art School for 6 Saturdays. During my research for this video, I used multiple sources, but by far the best source I had, and the most enjoyable one, was this book, his autobiography. It's kind of a cute story by Rolly Crump, as told by Jeff Heimbuch. Check out a link for it in the description below. Rolly eventually started working for Disney at age 22 for only $30 a week, which was half what he was actually making at a ceramic factory prior. His mother, always supportive of his passion, pushed him to take this job, even though his income was very crucial to their household. He started in 1952 working on Peter Pan as an in-betweener, which meant that he was basically doing 12 out of the 24 frames per second, you know, the in-between frames. Rolly became assistant animator to Erik Larsen, one of the 9 old men, who if you want to learn a little more about, you can, because we have a video on him in our Disney Legends series as well. During his time as assistant animator for Erik Larsen, he learned a lot, which was really important since he didn't have any formal art training, and they got along really well. Infamously, one day while working on 101 Dalmatians, Larsen approached Crump and said, "Okay, Rolly, do the spots." And he ended up having to animate all of the spots on the Dalmatians in the Canine Crunchies scene. During his time in animation, he worked on Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and 101 Dalmatians. He got an idea of what it was like to work for Walt, though not from first-hand experience. He actually didn't meet Walt until later on, but he learned that it wasn't worth showing Walt something unless he hadn't seen it before. And this was actually to Rolly's advantage, because he had a keen eye for new ideas. While working in the studios, his love for kinetic sculpture was born and flourished. He started making propellers and mobiles. He started making propellers and mobiles and hanging them around his studio, and they'd come alive every time the air conditioner kicked on. The place was alive with colorful, moving art. He also started selling his own little projects in the studio to the other animators, like crystal radios and some tongue-in-cheek counterculture marijuana and dope posters that he made and got prints of. Walt actually saw these posters and luckily embraced Rolly's sense of humor and skilled artwork and kept him in mind 5 years later when hand-choosing animators to go and work at WED, the Imagineering department name at the time. If you like Disney history and analysis, go ahead and like this video, and while you're at it, subscribe to this channel. We have weekly videos just like this one where we cover everything under the Disney umbrella. Rolly really isn't known for his career in animation as much as he is known for his career in Imagineering. In 1959, 4 years after Disneyland opened, Rolly had his first day at WED, and it was also the first day he ever met Walt. Straight from the autobiography, it's kind of a cute story, Rolly has this to say about Disneyland. From day one, I've always felt that Disneyland was a gorgeous salad because of the ingredients. There's a little bit of something in there for everyone. The attention to detail is one of the most important pieces of it because there is so much in there. A good example is the little figures in the popcorn wagons. Those little things are the croutons that are in the salad that make it so delicious. I really feel like that was why Disneyland was always so successful. I hate to say it, but the other theme parks were nothing more than just lettuce and tomatoes. This is just how Rolly approached things. For example, much later in his career, when it came to the trash cans at Disneyland, Rolly took them from plain, uniform trash cans throughout the park to instead having each one of them painted with a theme that was unique to the land that they were in. At first, during his time as an Imagineer, Rolly made propellers for the attraction Wizard of Oz, which never got built, as well as worked on the set of Babes in Toyland, and during this time, he even opened his own art gallery. Now, here comes the part where I had first heard of Rolly. The part where he and Yale Gracie were tasked to work on a brand new attraction coming to Disneyland, the Haunted Mansion. You may remember in a video that I previously did about one of the early concepts for the Haunted Mansion, that the attraction wasn't always set out to be what it is actually today. Crump and Gracie went through many ideas and concepts before it became the Omni-Mover Doom Buggy guided tour through a mansion full of singing spirits and illusions. And Rolly states that only about 25% of what they came up with actually made it into the final mansion. But the idea of using magic tricks was there from the beginning. Walt gave them lots of creative freedom on designing and coming up with any ideas that they could, and in fact, this was the first time Walt wasn't giving his full guidance on designing an attraction. Early concepts that they developed did end up in the final ride, like the singing busts in the graveyard scene, or the heads popping out from behind gravestones, as well as the stretching room and the use of the Pepper's ghost effect in the ballroom scene. Rolly is very adamant that the attraction would be so much better as a walkthrough, and he says that Walt agreed with him, but unfortunately Walt passed away before the ride was complete, so we'll never really know for sure. But we're getting ahead of ourselves in the timeline, so let's rewind a bit. During the time that Rolly started working for WED, Disneyland was a brand new work in progress, and there was nothing else like it at the time on the scale that it was at. And the designers, like Rolly, were really doing everything from scratch, innovating different techniques and designing brand new ways of building projects. For example, when he was building the Bizarre Bazaar in Adventureland, he was using a mishmash of found objects and breathing life back into discarded props from other Disneyland attractions. And for the Enchanted Tiki Room pre-show area, to get the texture of bark onto the tiki figurines, Rolly got really crafty and actually used a fork from the studio cafeteria. And fun fact, the tikis that are actually in that pre-show area are fashioned after actual real tiki gods. He hand sculpted and designed a lot of what you see in Walt's Enchanted Tiki Room in Disneyland today. He was doing this back in 1963, when everything in Disneyland was much more hands-on and much less corporate. And this is why I love Disneyland and other Disney parks. It's these stories behind everything, because everything has a story. And having all these stories behind the creation of attractions and shops and all the other little details around the parks makes these things time capsules. It's really special. So if you remember in my Mary Blair Disney Legends video, I talked about the 1964 New York World's Fair. Along with Mary Blair, Rolly Crump was chosen to design the attractions that were going to be presented by Disney. This is where the two of them actually met. But Rolly Crump had been an admirer of her work for years before. Crump was assigned to many different projects for the World's Fair, including Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and famously for making a sculpture made out of mobiles to sit right out in front of It's a Small World, which now sits right at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. True story. He was also in charge of building toys on It's a Small World. He even made one toy doll to tribute Mary Blair, who who has her likeness, and now still sits atop the Eiffel Tower in the France scene. He was then put in charge of reinstalling It's a Small World to go into Disneyland after the World's Fair. And at this point, he contacted Mary Blair to help him sketch a design for the facade. He used her style in the design and added propellers and the clock tower. He really wanted to mimic the movement seen around the rest of the park. He and Mary became very close friends. Some even called them two peas in a pod, which is why at the beginning of It's a Small World, right off to the right, there's two peas sitting in a pod. And I just love this, mostly because I'm inspired by both of their artwork so much in my own artwork, and I think it's just a perfect little story. Oh, it's kind of a cute story. And for the record, he believes that the character additions to the attraction were beautifully done. After the World's Fair and It's a Small World was complete, Rowley went back to working on the Haunted Mansion. He really didn't want the attraction to be one of those corny haunted houses that you see at county fairs, with the only haunt factor being the ghosts. So he began creating very strange and unusual creatures, and surreal and animate objects with human and animal-like body parts. He planned a seance room, a character named the Mistress of Evil, and a man-eating plant, and so many other things that either did or didn't make it into the final attraction. Oh, and that man-eating plant sketch was later turned into the famous Haunted Mansion wallpaper design that we know today. Eventually, finishing the Haunted Mansion was divided into two groups. One group finishing the look of the mansion, and the other group being Rowley working on a project now named the Museum of the Weird. This was planned to be a room that looked like it was a collection of strange and unusual artifacts collected from around the world and put on display for you as you exited the Haunted Mansion attraction. If you'd like me to do a full video on the Museum of the Weird, let me know in the comments below, and if there's enough interest for it, I'll make sure I do one. Unfortunately, Walt died in 1966, and under new management, Rowley's idea for the Museum of the Weird was scrapped. Before Walt died, he assigned Rowley to work on the 1967 redesign of Tomorrowland, and so after his Museum of the Weird idea was scrapped, he went to work on that. Redesigning Tomorrowland was the last thing he'd ever worked on with Walt. In the late 1960s, Disney management put Rowley to work on the set design, props, and backdrops for a traveling show called Disney on Parade. This was a show like a traveling circus that was meant to perform in arenas instead of on ice like we now have with Disney on Ice. The project seemed doomed from the beginning, but in the end it turned out to be a big success and went on to perform for a few seasons. Rowley Crump was eventually moved out of WED and into working at Disneyland as supervising art director for the entire park. During this time, he was responsible for making many of the upgrades around the park. He really loved Disneyland, and he really took good care of it. And then he was put in charge of designing Fantasyland at the new Walt Disney World Resort being built in Florida. But without Walt, things just weren't the same, and he eventually left the company. Of this, Rowley says, "Disneyland has charm. Disneyland freaking hugs you and kisses you." And he just didn't feel the same way about how Walt Disney World was coming along. Since then, he's worked on his own projects, had his own art shows, and recently was in the Disney Plus docuseries, The Imagineering Story. He's also worked for Knott's Berry Farm and other theme parks. And Disney even asked him to come back to help with the design of Epcot when it seemed like they just didn't know what they were gonna do with the park. He was responsible for designing the Land and the Wonders of Life pavilions. He created the Living with the Land attraction and also the extinct attractions Kitchen Cabaret and then Food Rocks. He also designed the Electric Umbrella restaurant and developed the idea for what is now known as Kidcot, as well as adding electric propellers all around the park to mimic the same movement that he always loved from Disneyland. And there's also a lot of other stories about designs and ideas that he had that didn't end up making it into the final park. Rowley is one of a kind. Like I said earlier, everyone seems to have a nickname for him because he just seems like the type of guy that you want to give a title to. He's not a yes man, like a lot of other people working at Disney were. He was a no-nonsense kind of person, an innovator, someone who could sense how to make something new, that audiences would love. A true Imagineer, with the mind and talent of an artist and the drive to figure out how things worked. In an article from the LA Times, Todd Martin says, "Crump is one of the most important designers in the development of early Disneyland, and one of only a few surviving architects of the park who can speak directly to the intentions of its creator, Walt Disney." If you want to get a real feel of what Raleigh is like and how his talent, ideas, and personality shaped Disney, check out It's Kind of a Cute Story by Rolly Crump, as told by Jeff Heimbuch. The link will be in the description below. And if you're a diehard fan of these behind-the-scenes stories, there's also links to the audio companions of It's Kind of a Cute Story, which are linked below as well if you want to hear the accounts of these stories straight from Raleigh's mouth. Not all of the people who we feature in the Disney Legends playlist are actually official Walt Disney Legends, but Rolly Crump is. He was reluctantly awarded with the title in 2004. There are so many stories about Rolly in Mary Blair, Ward Kimball, Eric Larson, and other notable Disney legends in this book, as well as stories of the pranks that the animators and Imagineers would play on each other. Rolly is a goofball, and I love that about him. I think we'd actually get along quite well. My favorite anecdotes from the book come from the stories of the early Haunted Mansion concepts, a real-life haunting in Yale Gracie's life, and a prank that they had played on the nighttime janitorial crew. And if you're planning on going to the parks and admiring all the things that Rolly Crump did, make sure you stop by the Palm Parlor on Main Street to see his tribute window. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you want to be even more of a supporter of this channel, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/network1901. It helps us out a lot to create even more well-researched and presented content just like this. And if you're going to the parks, check out modernmouseboutique.com and use code network1901 to get 10% off. I have handmade mouse ears and other kinds of hair accessories there as well that are perfectly designed for your trips to the parks, and they're super comfortable, and they're all made by me. And until next time, hurry back. Is that good?